August 23rd, the day of the defeat of Nazi German forces by Soviet troops in the Battle of Kursk. The Battle of the Kursk Salient, which lasted from July 5th to August 23rd, 1943, became one of the key battles of the Great Patriotic War. In Soviet and Russian historiography, it is traditionally divided into three phases: the Kursk Defensive Operation, July 5th to 23rd, the Oral Offensive Operation, July 12th to August 18, and the Belgorod-Kharkov Offensive Operation, August 3rd to 23rd. The date of August 23rd was chosen as the end of the Battle of Kursk in honor of the liberation of Kharkov. During the Great Patriotic War, fierce fighting for this city occurred 4 times, and only on this day was it finally liberated. The Battle of the Kursk Salient. During the winter offensive of the Red Army and the subsequent counteroffensive of the Wehrmacht in eastern Ukraine, a salient up to 150 kilometers deep and up to 200 kilometers wide formed in the center of the Soviet-German front, facing westward, the so-called Kursk Salient. The German High Command decided to carry out a major offensive operation against the Kursk Salient. To this end, in April 1943, a military operation codenamed Operation Citadel was approved. The Germans linked its success with hopes of regaining the lost strategic initiative and turning the course of the war in their favor. It was assumed that Soviet forces would be the first to launch an offensive. However, in mid-April, the Stavka revised its planned course of action. The reason for this was intelligence received by Soviet reconnaissance, indicating that the German command was preparing a strategic offensive against the Kursk salient. The Stavka decided to wear down the enemy with a powerful defense, then parity to a counteroffensive and destroy its strike forces. This marked one of the rarest cases in the history of warfare when the stronger side, possessing the strategic initiative, deliberately chose to begin combat operations not with an offensive, but with a defensive posture. Subsequent events showed that this bold plan was fully justified. Balance of forces on the eve of the Battle of the Kursk salient. To carry out the operation, the Wehrmacht committed its most combat-ready forces, 50 divisions in total, along with a large number of independent units. Overall, the German grouping numbered more than 900,000 personnel, around 10,000 guns and mortars, 2,758 tanks and assault guns, and slightly more than 2,000 aircraft. The enemy command placed particular hopes on the use of new military hardware, the heavy Tiger and Panther tanks, Ferdinand assault guns, Focke-Wulf FW-190A fighters, and Henschel HS-129 ground attack aircraft. The operational plan envisioned encircling and destroying the Soviet force through sudden converging attacks in the general direction of Kursk, and, if successful, developing the offensive deeper into Soviet territory. By the beginning of the Battle of Kursk, the Stavka of the Supreme High Command had assembled a grouping, the Central and Voronezh fronts, totaling more than 1.9 million personnel, over 26,000 guns and mortars, more than 4,900 tanks and self-propelled artillery units, SPGs, and about 2,900 aircraft. Soviet forces outnumbered the opposing enemy grouping near Kursk by 2.1 times in manpower, 2.5 times in artillery, 1.8 times in tanks and SPGs, and 1.4 times in aircraft. The troops of the Central Front, commanded by Army General Konstantin Rokossovsky, defended the northern face of the Kursk salient, while the troops of the Voronezh Front, commanded by Army General Nikolai Vatutin, held the southern face. In their rear, strategic reserves were deployed and organized into the Steppe Military District, which on July 9th was redesignated the Steppe Front, commanded by Colonel General Ivan Konev. Its mission was to prevent a deep enemy breakthrough and, once Soviet forces transitioned to a counteroffensive, to build up the striking power from the depth. The Battle of Prokhorovka. On July 5, 1943, in accordance with the plan of Operation Citadel, German strike groupings launched an offensive toward Kursk from the areas of Orel and Belgorod. Just a week later, on July 12th, near the Prokhorovka railway station, 56 kilometers from Belgorod, the largest head-on tank battle of World War II took place. It was fought between the advancing enemy armored grouping, Operational Group Kempf, and Soviet forces delivering a counterblow. Up to 1,200 tanks and self-propelled guns took part in the battle on both sides. The fierce fighting lasted all day. By evening, tank crews and infantry were engaged in hand-to-hand combat. In a single day, the enemy lost about 10,000 men and more than 360 tanks and was forced to go over to the defensive. The further course of the battle. On the same day, the troops of the Bryansk Front, the Central Front, and the left wing of the Western Front began Operation Kutuzov, aimed at defeating the enemy's Oral grouping. On July 13th, the forces of the Western and Bryansk fronts broke through the enemy's defenses in the Bolkhov, Kotinets, and Oral directions and advanced 8 to 25 kilometers in depth. On July 16th, the troops of the Bryansk front reached the line of the Oleshny River, after which the German command began withdrawing its main forces to their original positions. By July 18th, the troops of the right wing of the Central Front had completely eliminated the enemy salient in the Kursk direction. On the same day, the troops of the Steppe Front were committed to the battle and began pursuing the retreating enemy. On August 5th, as a result of operations Kutuzov and Rumyantsev, Orel and Belgorod were liberated. That evening, in Moscow, an artillery salute was fired for the first time during the Great Patriotic War in honor of this event. On August 23rd, Kharkov was liberated. Soviet troops advanced 140 kilometers to the south and southwest, securing favorable positions for launching a general offensive to liberate left bank Ukraine and reach the Dnieper River. The Soviet army finally consolidated its strategic initiative, and the German command was forced to switch to the defensive along the entire front. Results of the Battle of the Kursk salient. According to Soviet sources, the Wehrmacht lost 30 divisions in the Battle of Kursk, including 7 armored divisions, more than 500,000 soldiers and officers killed, wounded, and captured, 1,500 tanks and assault guns, and over 3,700 aircraft. Losses of the armed forces of the USSR amounted to more than 860,000 personnel, including about 255,000 killed and missing. For acts of heroism in the Battle of Kursk, 231 individuals were awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, and more than 100,000 soldiers and officers received orders and medals. A total of 132 formations and units were granted Guard status, and 26 received honorary titles such as Orel, Belgorod, Kharkov, and Karachay. For its contribution to victory in the Great Patriotic War, Kursk region was awarded the Order of Lenin, and the city of Kursk received the Order of the Patriotic War, First Class. On April 27, 2007, by decree of Russian President Vladimir Putin, Kursk was awarded the honorary title of the Russian Federation, City of Military Glory. Significance of the victory in the Battle of Kursk. The Battle of the Kursk salient led to a further shift in the balance of forces on the front in favor of the armed forces of the USSR, definitively secured their strategic initiative, and created favorable conditions for launching a general offensive. The defeat of the enemy near Kursk became a crucial stage in achieving the decisive turning point in the war. In addition, the outcome of the Battle of Kursk significantly affected Germany's relations with its allies, leading to a loss of confidence. The governments of Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria began actively seeking contacts with the USSR and the allies of the anti-Hitler coalition with the aim of withdrawing from the war. The defeat at Kursk also contributed to Turkey's decision not to enter the war on Germany's side. Declassified FSB documents on the Battle of Kursk. In July 2023, the Central Archive of the Federal Security Service, FSB, of the Russian Federation, declassified documents related to the Battle of Kursk. According to these materials, the NKGB of the USSR obtained the first reports on the Third Reich's plans on May 10, 1943. It was then that it became known the Germans were concentrating forces for a decisive strike against Moscow, Kursk, and Orel. After that, the enemy planned to advance from Orel toward the city of Yelets and then move on to Penza. From Kursk and Kharkov, according to the Sonderführer, the offensive was to develop in the direction of Voronezh, from Belgorod toward Maloarkhangelsk, with the task of encircling and destroying the grouping of Soviet troops located in this sector of the front, one of the declassified documents states. Just 4 days later, this information was delivered to the Intelligence Directorate of the General Staff of the Red Army. Thanks to these reports, the command was able to develop a plan for the country's strategic defense and the subsequent counteroffensive near Kursk and Belgorod.